My name is Jamal Hoballah. I'm a vascular surgeon. I'm also the chair of the Department of Surgery at the American University of Beirut in Beirut, Lebanon. One of the key research projects that we embarked on was to see the financial and cost effectiveness of endovascular repair of aortic aneurysms compared to open surgical repair, the traditional one. From the perspective of a middle-income country like Lebanon, and also to look at it from the perspective of low-middle-income countries. In countries like European centers where the trials were performed, the endovascular repair of aortic aneurysms was not found to be cost-effective in the long term. While in the studies that were performed here in the US, the OVER trial, the endovascular repair was found to be cost-effective. So it was very important for us to really look at how this thing applies to low middle income countries, because such findings cannot be applied to any country and in any region. So we conducted a study looking at our outcomes and our costs. And basically the findings are that we can do this procedure, but be it open or endovascular. We were able to do it in a middle income country with excellent results comparable to the one that are performed in developed or high-income countries and in the Western world. But when it came to the costs, we realized that there was significant difference in the costs and that the open surgery had much lower costs than the endovascular surgery. And when we did that, we looked at what are the cost drivers in both operations. And we found out that the cost drivers on the short term are the cost of endograft on one side and the cost of the hospital fees and ICU care on the other side. On the long term, you have to look at what kind of complications, what kind of procedure-related complications are happening and how much does it cost to fix those, and then also figure out the cost effectiveness of the procedure. The ICU costs were significantly high. So the savings you get from having an endovascular repair with a short hospital stay and no ICU will offset the cost of the endograft. The physician charges were comparable for both, but the hospital charges were much higher in the endovascular, and the main cost driver here was the price of the endograft. For example, the ICU cost in low middle income countries varies between $100 to $400 per day, while the ICU cost in countries like the US or in other areas that are high income goes anywhere from $3,000 to as high as $6,000 in the US. So you can see how this thing is going to shift the cost effectiveness. On the other hand, the cost of the graft is going to be almost the same in the US and the Western world or in the high income countries compared to the low and middle income countries. In fact, in the low middle income countries, it may cost even higher because of other hidden costs such as the import and customs, etc., etc. So on the short term, it was clear that the open repair provided lower costs in places like in low middle income countries because of the lower hospital charges. In the long term, the complications of open surgery were mainly some types of incisional hernias. People get hernias at their incisions, while the complications in the endovascular were mainly related to endoleaks. The treatment of endoleaks, again, is much higher than the treatment of an incisional hernia. So even on the long run, you had more cost effectiveness in the open repair than in the endovascular. In addition, the endovascular required continued follow-up with surveillance by ultrasound and CAT scans, which are also costly. So this is how we also realized that in the long term as well, there is a more benefit for the open. Well, that doesn't mean that the endovascular is should not be done. On the contrary, I think that each country has to balance the costs and effectiveness within their own budgets and figure things out. This study also showed us that there are ways of improving the cost effectiveness, and that can be done by whether you're doing it open or you're doing it in an endovascular way. For the open, you really have to focus on ways to minimize the occurrence of incisional hernias. In addition, you can use the enhanced recovery programs that will allow you to do the procedure with short hospital stay, at the same time with lower costs and very good outcomes. And also, if you do it in a high volume center, there's a good chance that you can do that with better outcomes and less costs. For the EVAR, I think everything's going to depend on the competition on the price of the endograft. In addition, sticking to the IFU, because if you stretch the envelope, you are more likely to have endoleaks that are causing repeated interventions that are costly, etc. And on top of it, being done in a high volume center can also help getting the results as good as you can.